we thank you for, there you go, we are being recorded. And I'm going to present my screen so we can get started. Okay, very good. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Mark Heckman. I appreciate you joining us today for this important topic about how local and municipal officials can help to avert crisis during emergencies. I certainly thank Aaron and the Water Resource Center for allowing me to present this today. And if you are a frequent SPC or Water Resource Center attendee, Aaron eagerly looks for feedback on what topics were well delivered or maybe need to be covered in the future. So we encourage you to be in touch with her, certainly about this presentation and others that maybe you'd like to see so that she can continue to meet your needs as a resource to the regional municipalities. So again, my name is Mark Heckman. I'm pleased to be here today. And the format for today, I'll largely be speaking. Everyone's killing it right now because you're on mute. Totally fine that you killed your cameras. It is lunchtime, so feel free to kick back and enjoy lunch if that's what you're doing. I'll provide some content for a bit. There'll be a chance to ask questions at the end should you like. So if you are eating or whatnot, maybe just have something handy to write a question down should something come to mind. But that all said, let's dive in. I don't know about you guys, but I'm certainly feeling a bit sick of the many crises we tend to face. And certainly that's what you read in the news. And I kind of identify with Secretary of State Kissinger here that I wish I could just say my schedule was already full. But as a municipal official myself, whether elected or not, it's kind of our job to be ready as these issues come up. And it turns out that these are much bigger issues to navigate than simply solving the crisis itself. These are just a couple local headlines of what is kind of circling these days, whether it's weather related, whether it is unfortunately pandemic related, something that could have been prevented that's crime or infrastructure related, water problems, of course. So these are what we're facing at the national, regional, local levels. And we are responsible for creating the calm and creating the troubleshooting environment that engenders some semblance of trust between our constituents and ourselves and between government. But it turns out that that's a taller task than sometimes we're able to meet. And so today is not about emergency management. Folks probably are familiar with the term and have folks that handle those tasks within public safety or as emergency management coordinators. That's not what we're talking about today. We're not going to talk about how to apply for PEMA funding or other things for disaster relief. And this isn't a workshop on writing formal communications like press releases or whatnot. Rather, today is about how we relationally create calm and build trust with our constituents when they're in moments of crisis, which happens to be a skill that, in my experience, is often overlooked and is not properly delivered to constituents regularly. How we can exhibit leadership under those difficult circumstances as it is trying on anyone that's involved. And ultimately, I think to figure out how to solve for the relationship between government and the constituent, not simply how do we solve the immediacy of the crisis at hand. And that is a delicate balancing act. Why should you even care what I have to say on the matter? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I do this for a living. Some of my consulting work is with local governments to help them build better relationships with constituents in crisis times or not. And I practice what I preach. I am Borough Council President in Castle Shannon, south of Pittsburgh. And I also serve on the boards of Medical Rescue Team South and Ambulance Authority and on the Municipal Board of Alcosan. So just a few municipal commitments or authority commitments that help me get exposure to the difficulties presented by crisis and who can or cannot deliver well on those moments. So with that, what we'll do today is we'll talk about the relationship you should be building with constituents during a crisis, and then ultimately what are some tactical ways that you can build that trust-based relationship so that you walk away with a far more lasting and, let's say, enriched with goodwill relationship with constituents as a result. We'll do a quick case study that I think is useful in demonstrating some of those tactics, and then we'll talk about your experience with these things and answer questions. So first we want to talk about, okay, so hey, I work in government. I already have a relationship with my constituents. Why does crisis present any difference in how I should relate to them? And to discuss this, I want to give you something of a metaphor for the difference between solving a situation and solving a relationship. If you happen to commute to work anymore, or again, you may have had the lousy experience of being rear-ended, let's say on your commute to work. So if it's been a frenetic morning, you're on your way to work, you got to get there, and sure enough, you take an exit ramp, someone isn't yielding, and boom, hits you in the back. It's hard enough that you know there's damage, you're irked by the whole situation, you wanted to get to work and now you can't, and you have to file a claim. So you get out of your car as the person behind you gets out of their car, you look at them and you see a stranger, you don't know this person from Adam, and you kind of treat it as a result like you're dealing with a stranger. You're probably saying things like, whether in your head or out loud, probably saying something like, you know what, I don't appreciate this. This is the last thing I needed this morning. Were you paying attention? These are things that certainly don't de-escalate, but are reflective of your feelings. But your goals for this situation are, I need to get this person's information, assess the damage to my car, and basically get on with my day so I can file a claim. That's what you're trying to get through. Now imagine the same situation, you get rear-ended, all the same conditions, you get out of your car to see who rear-ended you, and you find out that that person isn't a stranger, but instead is your neighbor, meaning the next door neighbor you live next to. Something tells me that you might approach that a little bit differently. You may still be irked, you may certainly not appreciate the inconvenience in your day, but the dimension of what you're trying to solve for is now bigger. It's not just get the information and skedaddle. It's actually now you have to worry about, okay, I don't want my neighbor to not, have a good relationship with me. I don't want it to be awkward. And so you might approach it a little differently, maybe a little more delicately, maybe more cordially. And so I want you to think about that metaphor because it actually presents close to something I'm trying to relate for our goals here for the relationships between constituents and their government. You don't want to treat it like it's a one-off situation. Rather, you want to solve for a relationship. And as we just discussed, that means you have to take into consideration some other things. If you like, let's say, academic style reading, I certainly have some taste for it, but not a lot. An economist named James Carse wrote a book about finite and infinite games. You don't need to know anything about this book. You may never read it. But there's a really interesting concept that applies quite nicely to the work we do in municipal government. He writes that a finite game is played for the purpose of winning, whereas an infinite game is played for the purpose of continuing play. Now, what is a game? Well, a game can mean literally a game, like a game of basketball. But a game is actually just any interaction we have in our lives. So, for example, in the rear ending of your car situation, if you're dealing with a stranger, this is a finite scenario, which is I just need to get the information I need to get, and then file the claim and be done with this. I don't want to spend any more time. I have no relationship to manage. Whereas when it's your neighbor, it turns into an infinite game, which is I can't just walk away and have a bad rapport with this person. I'm going to see them playing with their kids in their backyard. I'm going to see them at the parade next week. I'm going to walk their kids to school together. So you have something more at stake here. And you can see how the motivations for playing infinitely or for a continuing game change how you may want to manage that relationship. That's all you need to know about that book, but it turns out that in the context of government, we play quite a many finite and quite a many infinite games. Examples of finite games. We have a constituent complaint. Hey, my garbage wasn't picked up today. Okay, well, this isn't some existential crisis. This is, let's call the servicer, get them to pick up their trash, and it's done. There's no further dimension to that interaction. One-off policy opposition. Hey, things are fine, but I really would like to see some movement on urban agriculture in my neighborhood. You should pass a resolution to do that. Okay, that's interesting. Whether you pass it or not, it probably doesn't, sully the water for a long-term relationship. It's kind of a finite moment. Same with a neighbor dispute or maybe a code enforcement issue. These are finite interactions. But it turns out that much of what we do in government is infinite, which means there's long-lasting relational dimension to it. Obviously, what we do with our tax base, that has a direct impact on pocketbooks of people and where money is spent. So people pay attention to that and will judge you accordingly, and it will inform how they treat the relationship. Large community investments in infrastructure, so stormwater, MS4, business development type things, those engender larger stakes in the game, so to speak, for where the relationship goes. If you've ever been involved with negotiating agreements with labor unions, those too are infinite, which is even if you are kind of loaded for bear at the negotiating table, I got news for you. The second that you guys agree on something or goes through arbitration, you're back on the same team again. And so there's this kind of ebb and flow of where you can actually occupy an opposing place before you're back on the same team. And that truly is the same with our constituents. We're responsible for delivery of services generally. So how well are we providing public safety, sanitation, recreation, programming, you name it? That has an infinite dimension to it. Economic development's the same way. And the topic of today is that public safety and crisis management too have infinite dimensions. Safety is something where if you feel unsafe, it is incredibly unsettling to your well-being, and it colors how you view your neighborhood and your government. So it too has a fairly infinite dimension to that. So bottom line on this is that crises occupy a particular type of activity that government does that requires us to think bigger than just a finite problem-solving moment. It asks us to think infinitely. So we want to solve not just for the logistics of a crisis. It's not just put out the fire that's impacting a home. It's now what do we need to do to rebuild the relationship between the constituent and the municipality in light of the crisis. So it's an and statement. You have to do both, of course, but oftentimes we neglect the relational piece, and that actually is to our detriment. Of course, if you botch the finite moments, so if you continually, you don't do a good job at code enforcement, for example, that is going to sow the seeds of a lousy infinite impact, which is your relationship suffers as a result. And you probably are going to have to yield a lot of similar types of complaints over time. So we can't let finite moments trip up the infinite relationship because they both relate. And as it is true in crisis management, is that we can't just hope and pray that nothing happens. We oftentimes just, the only normal we can assume is that the next crisis is coming. It's probably going to be at an inopportune time, but it's our job to be prepared for it when that happens. And it's not just be prepared to solve the crisis, but be prepared to solve the relationship. And doing this is an art. So just to say, it's not easy work, and I don't think I even get it right as borough president all the time, but it's important that I set the parameters and the standard by which my staff, my colleagues, elected officials, and others bring to those moments. And so with that, I want to give you some tactical things. So this is not some abstract, hey, Mark, thanks for that academic definition. It actually does manifest on the street, so to speak. And I want to show you some of those moments. The things I'm about to cover here are actually adapted from some ideas that come from Stephen Covey from The Speed of Trust. And that's a pretty major contribution to trust building generally within the context of business, but it certainly applies to government as well. So the first thing you have to do, you walk up into a crisis situation, is that the best thing we can do is present the situation honestly. So in this case, let's use the use case of a house fire. You are dealing with someone who now doesn't have a home and likely has things that are destroyed. Hopefully everyone occupied is safe. You really need to level with them as far as what is going on with facts that can present. Where we tend to struggle as municipal officials, elected or otherwise, is that we oftentimes don't want to speak when there is unknowns. We perceive that as something of an issue around liability. And that can obviously cut against the empathy that someone would like to receive in that moment. We also tend to confuse concern or anger from a constituent with a feeling of blame. And if you've ever been in one of those heated council or township meetings, of course, things get hot under the collar if you're the one receiving a lot of the anger. and it's easy for us to default into a defensive position over that. In this case, someone who, again, is losing personal possessions and have been maybe displaced from their home, they are going to be concerned, upset, distressed, and we need to be okay accepting not necessarily blame, but knowing that they're going to come with that heaviness into the situation. So how do we present honestly in this conversation? Well, these are actually simple solutions. We really want to lay out what we know, what we don't know, and what we're doing to learn more. So in this case, what do we know? Everyone's out of the house and is safe. We know that there is some residual damage to nearby buildings. We know that some of the neighbors have been affected as far as their concerns for the neighborhood and for the affected family. What we don't know is when can the person go back and occupy their home? We don't know if the structure is safe. We don't know what caused the fire, but these are all things we're interested in knowing. And to do that, here's what we're doing and what timeline we're going to do that with. Now, again, those are things that, yes, the emergency management coordinator and your public safety officials they're already going to be doing that work, but the constituent doesn't yet know that, or isn't maybe in the mental capacity to process that effectively. So that's where we can begin that trust building process, begin that infinite interaction, and say, let me level with you, let me give you what's really going on, fact-based. Once you do that, we move into the second task, which is to get on your constituents' level, which is to say, don't let them feel like they are suffering alone, rather that they are part of a partnership between themselves and their government, and that you're there to assist in any way you can. Flooded backyards or water damage is a good example of this. Where we tend to fall short as municipal officials is we take for granted that there is already a power dynamic in the situation. We're coming in with resources, with expertise, with influence that someone who has just been displaced or just been distressed doesn't have. And we need to know that. We need to really understand that the constituent views that and is influenced by that. We also have a tendency to not value empathy. We think that our job is to be there to basically give them resources only, but not there to comfort. And I think it's one area where we suffer is we don't think that we're there to help to calm, rather we're there to inform. And if you've ever been in a distressing situation, sometimes you can get too much information and not enough empathy, and it's not servicing the overall constituents' feelings. So there are a couple tactical ways that you can get around that. I would encourage you, when you're working with people who are suffering, is that you want to talk in we statements. It is one rhetorical way that we tell them they are not suffering alone. So it's not that you should contact your insurance company or you should call family and find a way to get through the night or the next few weeks while the damage abates. It's that we want to see that you're in a safe place. We want to bring resources to you. We want to facilitate an introduction to the Red Cross, whatever's appropriate. But even just those we statements are meaningful. The other thing that's hard is that what I call a listen first posture, which is, again, when someone's life has been upended, they certainly have things they want to express or say, or have someone at least let them spout out. And so while we're there to respond to the crisis, in many ways, we're also there just to absorb it. We're there to be that kind of, for lack of a better term, that kind of punching bag, emotional punching bag, so someone can get back to level. And then even using I statements to start and build that empathy, saying things like, I would be upset as well, or I had a family member impacted by a similar circumstance and it was very difficult. So I understand where you're at right now. It doesn't solve the crisis, but it certainly gives someone, feels like they have a partner in this. So that's the second step, is you really want to go from let's give them good information, and then we want to make sure they know that we are there as a partner and as a peer. From there, we're responsible for giving them basically a track record and giving them clear steps that we're going to mitigate and be a good partner in resolving this. A good example here is a bank robbery. So it's not just that we did the job on the day. So again, was the fire put out? Did the fire department pump water out of your basements? In this case, did the bad guy get chased away and there's no security threat anymore? We have to do more than that because crises tend to create lasting impacts. So from a government standpoint, sometimes we assume that just being there is enough, or doing our job in that moment is enough. And I'm here to tell you that if you want to build that lasting, infinite relationship, we have to aspire to do more. We are accustomed, if you are, the so-called creature of government, or you've seen it from all sides, we're accustomed to things taking a long time, for investigations to, require diligence, for charges to evolve over time. Whereas the public thinks that this is, if it was your bank or your business that was robbed, you think this is the most important thing that's ever hit the town. And that may be short-sighted, but it is honest how they feel. So while we may be thinking, yes, this is going to take a week to 2 weeks and some investigative work, we need to make sure that they're aware that, it is a priority, even if we know delays are going to happen. And then, of course, honoring any stated commitments we make as part of the resolving of this crisis. That's part of our job, but it's, we can't take that for granted because sometimes we don't honor those stated commitments. So some tactical things here. I would encourage you to over-communicate through the recovery period. So in this case, again, let's say a bank is robbed. The assailant has moved on, may or may not get away with it, but you now have a business owner in the community that feels in jeopardy, is unsure if their building is safe in the future, is curious what public safety impact this is going to have into the future, wants to probably build a stronger relationship with your public safety crew, and your ability to meet them at that expectation or where they're most insecure is part of how we communicate through to recovery. So I would encourage you in moments like that. You really do want to over-communicate through the recovery period. Make them know that just because the incident was solved does not mean that their notions of safety have been restored. Also important, it's easy for us sometimes we have these preferred vendors to help with cleanup. So again, if you had a sewer line issue, you know who to call. But when something does happen that impacts constituents personally, sometimes it's important that you hire and refer people to assist that also have a sense of care and concern and consideration for folks who are going through these things. So in some ways, knowing who the owner is, knowing what staff are going to be on site. In this case, for example, the bank may look for recommendations as to, do they need on-site security? Do they need to increase their security camera? And we may have resources for them, but we want to be careful about who we put them in the hands of. Hopefully people who are responsive to the fact that they were just robbed. And then lastly here is we want to create expectations with the public. So even if, it's not the bank, maybe you're the restaurant down the street from the bank that didn't get robbed, but you certainly know. Towns are tiny in that regard. So it's not just a press release. It's not just they read it on the news, but they want to see how does our police department go about resolving this? What are our next steps as far as creating a safe perception in this, let's say, downtown area where a business has just been jeopardized? And that's important, whether that's communicated in a subsequent council meeting or whether that's posted on the website, whether that's sessions that's done in the public forum over time around public safety. We have the obligations to create and live up to expectations after crisis occurs. And then lastly, the fourth point is that we really want to deliver on our promises, but then also prepare for next time. A good example of this are crushed sewer lines or aging infrastructure. You really want to be known for completing projects as expected and creating that vision for making sure it doesn't happen again, or you're prepared for it if it were to happen again. The fact is that not all crises are random, and that we would take it for granted sometimes that planning is possible, that you would know what your kind of SWAT team approach is if, let's say, a sewer backup occurred and impacted a number of homes down a sewer line. And again, that kind of certainty that you exhibit that the next crisis is going to come. It may not be for months or years, but to have that plan at the ready is really important. completing the circle, what that means is ultimately, yes, you may have abated the immediate concern. In this case, a sewer backup impacting 6 homes on the same sewer line. You may have solved it. There are no outstanding claims for damages, but what's the plan? Because everyone is tethered into a sewer line, and many of them have been cameraed, but many of them have not. And you ultimately are on the hook for making sure that folks know, here's how we abated this instance, but here's how we're trying to make sure it doesn't happen again on your stretch of the neighborhood. So I would encourage you to try and talk about what happened in an accessible way. That's why I kind of said I really don't, we're not talking today about formal language and press releases, because those don't feel authentic often. But it's really, you have to create a context where people can say, wow, like, they understand the pain that I've experienced, the cost that was incurred publicly or privately, and they don't want it to happen in another way to my neighbors if it can be avoided. So creating that room for forum is actually really important, because then that next time the crisis comes down the street or across the neighborhood, people feel like you're already coming in with a plan and having addressed it favorably the last time around. You want to find demonstrable ways to show a shift in priority or care for the folks who are affected. In most cases, this ends up being budgetary. So, you have, let's say you have a major infrastructure issue and it's something you expect to happen again. Your budget is functionally your mission statement in some ways, which is you have to show that you're willing to put dollars towards mitigation, even if the threat is not known yet. But there are other ways too, of course. Again, how do you demonstrate that you care? Well, there's a lot of ways. And one below it is that you check in on the affected outside of the interval where the issue happened. I just think for a second, how often do we, 1 month after an issue has been resolved, how often do we contact that homeowner and just say, or homeowners, and just say, we'd love to know kind of how are things since then? Have you had any issues? Were there any ways that we could have improved our responsiveness to you and your situation? What a nice gesture, and something that I think those folks will remember, because they would probably not expect to hear it. So just some takeaways from those 4 points on how to tactically create more of an infinite or lasting relationship with constituents in crisis. Crisis mitigation truly is a relational and it is a tactical matter. So while we have and accept the responsibility for doing immediate mitigation of the crisis, find the bad guy or stop the fire or pump out the water, there is an implied expectation that we're doing more than that. We're creating that sense of public safety again if it has been damaged by the crisis that occurred, and we have to accept that that's part of the response. We can't take for granted the relationships with constituents. Language, empathy, availability, they all matter. I have met many public servants that believe that as long as the crisis is no longer a crisis, their job is done. And then what ends up happening is the next crisis comes and they are prejudged based on how something happened the last time. And people talk. If you've been on your Facebook threads or your neighborhood forums, the app Nextdoor and some of these other ones, people remember, certainly if it happens in a similar area again. So your demeanor is telling just as much as your ability to solve the immediate problem. So again, the job isn't over just when the incident ends. And it's worth saying that, goodwill is kind of what we say. This investment in creating strong relationships does pay meaningful dividends over time. Most people, there's some saying, I'm going to misquote it, but it's you don't remember the people that said nice things. You remember the person that said the mean thing. And the same thing is true. You don't remember all the good guys when the incident goes well or it's mitigated, but you certainly remember when you were negatively impacted. And that's when we have to be at our best. That's when we have to check all the boxes and care for more than just the immediate check boxes. So I just want to go through a quick case study, kind of end to end, of what this might look like across those 4 tactical categories. I'm sure each of you in your respective professions and positions, you've lived some form of this. Certainly landslides in this geography are common nowadays in wet weather. So I'm sure you can map over top of this your experiences, but let's just follow along for a quick minute. Let's say in this scenario that after a heavy rain season, a landslide occurs that damages the backyards, driveways, and sewer infrastructure that support 5 residential homes in a particular neighborhood. There are no physical injuries to people, but there's major property damage both above and below the slide. While the emergency crews determined there is no immediate risk for additional sliding, engineering is on site and starting to assess what that looks like. Over the subsequent days, sanitary smells and pooling are apparent, so there is some additional risk there, also for additional slides as rainy weather continues. This neighborhood also has a history of undermining, and so that further could be a destabilizing issue that these homeowners have to cope with. So going back to our 4 points, and again, prizing the fact that we want to create a lasting and favorable relationship with these constituents, how might we respond? Our first point was present the situation honestly. So we have to say that this is a major engineering crisis, something that is certainly expensive, but requires a lot of assessment. So there's going to be limitations on how those property owners can or cannot use their property while this assessment is going forward. They individually, if they can stay in their homes, need to monitor for system backups or leaks, as that is going to create some residual concerns around public safety or toxicity. They are encouraged to contact their insurers immediately, as the municipality will, so that we can see how we finance the improvements. Folks are expected to be inconvenienced, hopefully minimally, by surveyors and staff that are going to check in on this site. And it's not going to be for a short term. To fix this is going to be months and months of disruption, depending on the size and scope. Not to mention, as you probably experienced in landslides, if it's wet enough weather to have one where you are, there are probably others that are occurring at the same time. So the geotechnical firms and whatnot, there are so few of them that you're not necessarily going to be the number one priority right away. So after that, we get on the constituents level, which is to say, okay, how can we keep you informed on the basis that you would like, so that you can feel like you have the support and access that you need. You want to offer that support where able, and even redirect them to vendors who may be able to help. As you can imagine, some of this is a private property concern, some of this is a public property concern. So it tends to it turns into issues, probably expects some legal, especially as it relates to easements, and they may not even know what an easement is. So it's up to you to try and inform them and then prepare them for what's ahead. This is not going to be cost neutral on their part, and that is an unfair thing, but it is going to help expedite the process of getting them back to a stable position. How do we prove to be a capable partner? Just the simplest thing of introducing key staff and site personnel to the homeowners. So if you've got 5 homeowners, let's say if they're all married couples, you've got 10 people that you need to have your, let's say, public works foreman, your engineering lead, any of the site supervisors that are happening for any engineering, and then probably your municipal staff manager. All of these people should be known to the homeowners, so that when someone's walking around in a yellow vest, they probably know who they are. So just something as simple as we're going to introduce you to the people that are going to be walking around your property for 3 months. That is, it sounds simple, but we often overlook that. Making a commitment to daily updates for a time, and then as things kind of progress, maybe it moves to weekly. Again, I can't tell you how many people in municipal government assume that, oh, well, I didn't get any new news from the geotechnical firm doing the core borings today, so there's no news to share with the constituents. Well, the constituents are looking out their kitchen window and watching their driveway get ripped into the abyss. And one day of not hearing from you feels like an eternity to them, and feels like a financial crisis to them as well. So the commitment to daily updates may not even be because there's good information to share daily. It's simply to say we care enough to give you daily updates, even if we're waiting for results. Apprise them of the municipal measures and expenses that we're taking. We happen to have a landslide in my municipality, and the homeowners that we engaged with were kind of surprised at how expensive, of course we weren't, but how expensive it cost to do the remediation work. How big the wall with the hydro block had to be, how much more expensive using a different engineering tactic would have been. So sometimes you need to share enough information about the options and ultimately why you chose what you chose, just to demonstrate that, hey, we're not coming out of this clean either, but it's the right thing to do. And then, of course, as construction and remediation occurs, asking the crew to be mindful of these disruptions. What we asked for a foreman in that instance is that he would basically schedule out a week of work with the homeowners and just say, here's what you can expect. Here's the type of equipment that's going to be on site. Here's what may be required as far as egress onto your property. And that, not that they were pleased when those things happened, but they at least understood that work was being done and they appreciated the forethought to inform them. And then, as I said, you need to deliver the goods. How do we prove that we're capable partners into the future so that things like this are planned for ahead of time? So making budgetary commitments so that future landslide events are budgeted for, maybe aren't budget breakers again. Doing a better than expected cleanup job. So, for example, it may not be the municipality's direct liability to restore a yard that was private property. However, sometimes as a sign of good faith, maybe you go the extra mile and you plant the grass seed for the constituent because they have a concern about it. So I just think it's usually always better when able to over deliver on things like that when people have been wiped out. And again, schedule that check-in with property owners a few months out, especially with such a disruptive thing. They're going to be watching their yards. They're going to be nervous every time it rains. So really good for them to see that you care enough to check in and be a resource to them moving forward. And then make that time to update the public accordingly. Something as dramatic as a landslide and in an area that's landslide prone, people are going to worry. People are going to hear from their neighbors that they feel at risk. So it really does matter that you close the loop with them on that. So that's a brief case study there, probably something you've experienced in some form or fashion. Some final notes before we jump into Q&A. I got to say, this stuff is difficult to do well, and I certainly don't view myself as an expert. Anytime there's heat of the moment, and let's just be honest, like the stuff we covered today, largely, some crime, some environmental, but we're dealing in an environment right now where, unfortunately, police officers are at risk. There's social unrest. There are significant things happening that are, I would argue, have even greater dimension than what we discussed today. But the basics that I'm sharing with you now still apply in those difficult instances as well. It really does only take one lousy interaction to lose trust. If you think about how many average touches or interactions do you have with the average constituent in your neighborhood, the answer is, even over your lifetime, if you serve in government over time, it's probably averaging less than one, right? Like you don't see many of your constituents because they don't have issues. So you really may only have one chance to get it right in order to build goodwill within a street, within a neighborhood, within a family. And you really do want to be on your best game in the tough moments. The other hard thing about elected officials, especially when there's churn in elected officials year to year or election to election, is that they depend heavily on staff and vendors, of course, to convey and earn that trust on their behalf. And I'll be the first to admit that I can't be on site for every instance of crime or disaster as an elected official because I have a day job. But we do rely on staff to carry forward the expectations that we set. So in some ways, while I'm sharing this content with you guys, if you are an elected official, in some ways you need to delegate this expertise to your staff and get them trained on it. If you are a staff member, how good it will be if you can carry yourself with these expectations in advance or without your council or township managers, elected officials kind of dictating it to you. But it seems to be best practice to me. They do surveys about trust levels in government, and unfortunately, again, blame who you will, but unfortunately, the trust between constituents and government is at a near all-time low. And local government actually presents the best chance to combat that assumption, just because local is what you see certainly right outside your front door. And it does affect everyone equally if you live in the same neighborhood. So I like the opportunity that presents to local officials, because you kind of by right are going to have a better chance than your state senator or anyone in the federal government from relating well. Again, the relational work of making people trust government better each time. And one could argue the bar is set incredibly low in low trust circumstances. So what better time to demonstrate that we can be better than expectation? And again, the value or the return on investment for creating goodwill is significant. I'll speak personally to that insofar as I have met and interacted with constituents that even before my time as council president had just such a raw, angry relationship with previous leadership in the borough. And they may have had good reason for that, but it's just this incremental prove to them that you can do better, prove to them that they can expect more from you, prove to them that you're going to listen more than you're going to talk. And each incremental time, I have seen sea changes in how people conduct themselves in public meetings. It moves from accusations into dialogue, which just fundamentally changes the nature of discourse. And this happens over years. You won't have one good instance that changes everyone's perception, most likely, but compounded over time, that goodwill pays some serious dividends. So with that, I'm pretty much right where I thought. So 45 minutes in, and I'm able to answer questions or comments. So feel free, unmute. If you'd like to put your video on, feel free. But we'd love to hear if you have any questions or comments about this content. Okay. All right. I'm seeing a lot of mute staying on, which is fine. What I can say is I take time with municipalities often to basically kind of train up on that trust building work. And like I said, something that I often see is that politicians can, myself included, but politicians can wrongfully assume that staff carry themselves like this all the time. Some very well may, and what a blessing that is, but some do not. And so my encouragement, if you are an elected official, is to have a serious conversation, not just about, again, the requirements of emergency management, but the next level, which is what is the aftercare? What happens post the event? And how can we be better about our responsiveness at the staff level to that? So that's if you're an elected official. If you are staff, I think it's great if you can take some of this content, which again, this will be syndicated through SPC, take some of this content to your elected officials and say, this can help you build better, more improved credibility, and that will kind of accrue benefits to you, make it easier for you to steward over the work of the borough or the township or the city. So that would be that way. If you are a vendor on the call and you just work on behalf of municipalities, I think this too is really important, because you are that bridge. You're the way that you may be the front person who is interfacing directly with the public on behalf of the municipality, and you too should be able to carry yourself with some measure of infinite relationship building on behalf of your client. And what a statement that would be, that you're a vendor that can carry the relationships equally as well as someone who is paid to do that or elected to do that. So again, any questions that I can answer? If not, yep, and I see Aaron just threw something in chat. Folks are able to check out and contact Aaron for future webinars and opportunities. This will be posted on the SBC website if there's interest in revisiting the content. But no reason to stay longer than that. So I thank you all. You see my contact information here, and Aaron's in the chat. So make use of it. And I hope that you, I don't wish crises on anyone, but when they happen, I hope this is helpful. So thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy your day.
Thank you.